Hello everyone, my name is Mark Tendai. I am a certified private pilot flying with and at Lewis University as a sophomore. In today's part 2 video, we cover the aircraft of our safety management system of PAVE. In part 1, we cover the pilot, and in part 3 and 4, we will cover the environment and external pressures. If you're joining me from the past video, thank you for continuing, and if you're a new viewer, welcome to the channel. We're going to remember a bunch of acronyms here, and we'll run through them all individually. There's a lot of words, and we'll run through them just as we did in the previous video. ATOMATOFLAMES is the day VFR required entrance on the top left. That will be the topic in black. And on the top right, the FAR will be listed, or any cited sources. ATOMATOFLAMES is 91205 section B for day VFR. There's a bunch of words here. What do they all mean? So if you look on the left, I just added 3 black boxes with green lines. These are potentially unrequired, and you're good to note them if you do an exam. Temperature gauges, why are they not? Well, because we have air and liquid cooled. If you are liquid cooled, you're required to have a temperature gauge. If not, you do not need a temperature gauge. So if you're air cooled, you don't need one. Your landing gear position indicator will give you your gear position for a landing gear position aircraft. So if you are able to retract your landing gear, you need a position to determine where it is. This is useful in determining errors if you're unable to see it in flight. Your manifold pressure gauge will measure the barometric, which is static, pressure that the engine is taking with a non-fixed pitch propeller aircraft. So we have our tachometer here, which gives us the engine runtime. This will also give us the revolutions per minute, the RPMs of the crankshaft. So if you have a fixed pitch propeller, it is directly connected to the crankshaft. If you want to measure the RPMs of the propeller, you look at the tachometer. It gives you the RPM of the crankshaft and propeller because it's one whole system. If you have a non-fixed pitch propeller or variable or any other type, you need to know the RPM of the propeller and the crankshaft. So you need a manifold pressure gauge to give you the static pressure that is being used to determine the RPM of the propeller. So the tachometer will still give you the RPM of the crankshaft, but the manifold pressure gauge will give you the RPM of the propeller itself. They're very important, and it's important to know the difference between why is a fixed not required. But in general, the nti-collision lights are aviation red or aviation white. Moving on to the main topic. Remember, this is or, so it's not both. If you hear on a test, hey, do you need aviation red and? No, it's aviation red or aviation white. This trips people up. Tachometer measures the engine runtime, along with giving us the RPM. Measures the engine runtime to give us good for inspections, while the Hobbs time just gives us general aircraft time. Oil temp gauge gives us our general oil temperature. Magnetic compass gives us magnetic heading. Useful once you begin instrument flying, but it does come with the errors, and you'll learn all about this. Altimeter will measure height in MSL, mean sea level. Oil pressure gauge will give you your general oil pressure. Fuel gauge will give you your fuel. Airspeed indicator will measure your indicated airspeed. You'll learn in the future, or if you have, there are multiple different types. You have indicated airspeed, IAS. You have calibrated airspeed, CAS. You have ground speed. You have true airspeed. All of these are important. Airspeed indicator gives you your indicated. ELT is your emergency locator transmitter, emergency location transmitter, while your safety belt is any general seatbelts. Moving on to the flaps acronym of the ATOMATOFLAMES flaps acronym. This is 91205 section C. Same FAR, different requirement. This is for night VFR, night visual flight rules. Only a couple here to talk about, but the first one is fuses. So for fuses, you need one spare set of fuses or 3 of each kind. Some people in their oral exams will say fuses / circuit breakers. Now this is incorrect, because if we cite the CFR directly, going into instrument flying, 1 spare set of fuses or 3 fuses of each kind required that are accessible to the pilot in flight. If you read through any of this, it does not say circuit breakers. That's why circuit breakers are incorrect. Landing lights are required for hire only. Anti-collision lights for aviation red or aviation white, we discussed that, but you're like, well, why is it required twice? Well, because the FAA made a decision that any aircraft certified after 1996 is required to have anti-collision lights for VFR in the day, while for VFR in the night, it's required for any aircraft certified to fly after 1971. So they're ensuring that older aircraft are still to safe standards in the night. Position indicator lights, these are the front red and green with the rear white. Source from FAR 25, but you don't really need to research that FAR. Just know that the lights are required and their position on the aircraft. It is all very similar to how boats work. Your source of electricity will be your alternator and battery. Remember, the alternator is directly connected to the crankshaft system, so as the crankshaft runs, it charges the alternator, gives power to the battery, and charges it as well. Know that generally the alternator is a higher volt and amperage than the battery, so that it is able to actually charge the battery. Some aircraft have standby batteries, some do not. It is not required to have a standby battery. A battery in general, though, is required. For top left, required certifications, this is the MARROW acronym. Some people write as Aero, some people as Aero E. I write as MARROW because I think it's just how I do it. Now, if you look on the top right, there's a bunch of FARs. Some of them aren't too important, though. 91.203 is important, 91.213 is important, and I would say 91.9 is not the most important for student pilots, but 91.203 and 213 are the most important. We'll run through each of these. A MEL is a minimum equipment list, and in the next slide, we will go through what is included with these lists for inoperative and down equipment. Just know that the general minimum equipment list is a overarching list of the bare bones required stuff to fly, like wings, propeller, like the basic stuff. It's expensive to get for an aircraft, and it is actually not required. Mostly for extremely large aircraft, it is required. But just know for like your general, like Cessna or like Piper, you're not generally going to have a minimum equipment list. Airworthieness certification, remember that these never expire, but they can become invalid if you do not complete your inspections, registration, or do not have any of the documents required for the aircraft. Radio license is required for international operations only. If you do want to get the radio license, you need the FCC Form 605. You also have to get these for yourself. Registrations, so for federal, it is 84 calendar months, and state, which is 84 calendar months, is 7 years. And remember that these end at the end of the year. It's a calendar month, and the state is required dependent on your state. Your POH is the Pilot Operating Handbook, generally updates the operating standards for your aircraft. Any weight and balance is typically included, but sometimes you might have to have a separate document for the weight and balance, which is required for each flight. Going more into the inoperative equipment checklist using top right FER 91.213 and advisory circular 91.67. So the federal aviation regulations are the actual aviations, but the advisory circulars are more of explanations that help the pilots understand, because sometimes reading the direct words from the page isn't the best and easiest way to learn. So this is 91.213 cited directly from the website, and we'll go over one by one. So the inoperative equipments are not part of VFR date type certification, so that's 91.205. Required on the kinds of operations list, that is in the POH. Any other section of 91.205 by an airworthiness directive, and this is how to remove them. You actually remove or disable and placard inoperative next to the instrument. By the end of this inoperative checklist, you will, as a pilot, make the determination if you're really going to fly. So with like these 91.205s and with these kinds of operation, usually it's like, well, you need to take it to get inspected, because like, what if it's something major? But at the end, the pilot is obviously the pilot in command of the safe operator flight. They're making the decision on whether to operate the checklist. Remember, this is for the inoperative checklist, inoperative equipment checklist. We're rolling through all of these just to make sure that it's safe to fly if we're moving any of these pieces of equipment. You can also use AC 91.67, which is a easier list to understand for student pilots. This will just give you kind of like how it works, and these are valid FAA documents. So is it required under the kinds of equipment list for the first section? If yes, remember, if you find any of these is required on any of these equipment, it's unairworthy. If not, you continue. But at the end of these decisions, if it's not in any of these documents, it's your decision if you're flying. Next, we're going to move into the required inspections. This is the aviated acronym. There's a bunch of FARs on the top right again. Remember, for these, we are mainly just looking at FAR 91.409, which is general inspections, and FAR 91.207, which covers our emergency locator transmitters. These are pretty simple, and we'll go through each one. So remember, everything in aviation is by calendar months. So 12 calendar months will be the end of, so say I got my annual on April 13th, which is my birthday. The next annual will be due on April 31st of next year. These annuals must be done by an airframe and power plant with inspection authority. These are pretty much a very high level of mechanics who can certify any of these inspections. Now, if you are a general A&P, you cannot do an annual, and you cannot do another inspection and cover it as an annual. If you're an A&P plus IA, you can cover it as an annual. VOR are required 30 days before an IFR flight. VORs are useful for determining radials and navigation, instrument flying. It's kind of how you navigate with ground-based systems. You'll learn all about that. Don't worry. 100 hours. These are done every 100 hours. Are required for higher operations. You can exceed this no more than 10 hours. So if you fly 100 hour and you fly for 100 hours as a for-hire operator, and you don't get inspected within that 100-hour period, the 100-hour is generally like an annual, but isn't. It's pretty much the same as the annual and how depth the inspection goes. If you don't get it within that 10-day period, you can exceed the flight by 10 hours, but the only purpose of the flight past that 100-hour period can be to go to get that inspection done. Now, for any of these inspections, you can get a ferry flight, which is like a temporary flight to go get the inspection done. So if you do not have like an A&P plus IA at your airport, you can go to another airport with a permit. But just know that you cannot exceed that 100 hours by 10 more hours if the sole purpose of that flight is going to get that 100 hours. So you can't fly for 100 hours as a for-hire operator and then go joyride around for 5. You have to get that flight done for the sole purpose of that 100-hour. The altimeter pitot system is every 24 calendar months along with the transponder, and it covers all of the pitot system in 91411. The transponder is tested every 24 calendar months and does not inspect the pitot system, but it inspects the transponder system. That's a funny typo. Your ELT is your emergency locator transmitter, and they'll be tested every 12 calendar months. So the general ELT is every 12 calendar months. The batteries are every 1 hour of cumulative use, or 50% of the half-life. So remember, the emergency frequency is 1 to 1.5. So 1 to is the 12 calendar months, 1 is the 1 hour of cumulative use, and 0.5 is the half or 50% half-life. Airworthieness directives and service bulletins. So these airworthieness directives are FAA required, and service bulletins are manufacturer suggested. There's basically like recommendations for service bulletins, recommendations on what to do with your aircraft, such as required like add-ons, like specifications. There's one for each type of aircraft, and you can look them on a website. While the airworthiness directives are required to follow and are published by the FAA for your certain aircraft, if, like for instance, an aircraft is manufactured and they find an error, you're required to follow an airworthiness directive to counteract that. Usually after an accident, they'll publish an AD, like saying, well, this is what you have to do from now on with your aircraft, or else it is unairworthy. Remember, if you do not do any of these inspections, your aircraft is unairworthy, although the airworthiness certificate never expires. So this is the end of this, and for each of these, you can obviously pause the video and go through them all, but these are all very important acronyms to remember in general aviation flying as a private student, commercial, and so on. So if you enjoyed this video, obviously give it a like and maybe subscribe, and if not, I'll see you for part 3.